200 films were produced in the Arab world. Surprisingly, more than half of these films dealt with drugs and drug addiction. In what way did they deal with drugs and with drug addiction? Were they positively oriented or negatively oriented? Were they a good thing or a bad thing? This is the subject of today's episode in our series Before the Fall.
Mustapha Drouish, well-known film critic and sometime film censor. Mr. Drouish, welcome to our program, and I would like to begin by first asking you, we noticed that recently, over the past 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years, there's been a wave of films revolving along the sole topic of drug addiction, drug use, drug trafficking, etc., etc. It has been almost a universal subject used in almost every single film that is shown in the Arab world. Can you give us, first of all, the historical background to the beginning of this wave?
It is a new phenomenon. In my opinion, it almost began by an American film, well known, The Man with the Golden Arm. It is an Otto Preminger, Frank Sinatra is the main actor. And after that, here in the Arab world, it began, in my opinion, by Hussein Kamal's film, Gossip on the Nile, adapted from a novel by Naguib Mahfouz. It was a very successful film.
That was in 1971?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And at that time, all films with drug scenes and, of course, drug films were banned in Egypt and in the whole Arab world because it was considered that they will influence especially the youth. But during the 70s, the code of censorship was amended, and after that there was the wave of drug films.
Do you see this as a good thing or a bad thing?
In my opinion...
Sorry, if I may be more specific in my question. Good vis-a-vis two things. Number one, good vis-a-vis the cinema and its creative powers. Good or bad vis-a-vis the cinema and its creative powers, or good and bad vis-a-vis the problem of drug addiction?
I think it was inevitable to make films about drug addiction because of the permissive societies in general, and because of liberty of creation in cinema, because it is considered now a medium of free thinking, you know. So nothing is to be banned. But the main problem with such films is that most of them are made to exploit the public.
Commercially.
Yes.
Would sometimes it is naively thought by authorities that it is possible to make a film that will help combat drug. Is such a thing possible? Would a producer or a scriptwriter sit down and think of a topic, apart from the obvious normal things, that the terrible consequences of using drugs, but does a film have a role in combating drug use?
Deterrent films are almost very rare films. It's very difficult to make a film which can convince the public not to be a drug addict.
But although it has been successfully proven in cigarette smoking, some pretty horrendous films of lungs before, lungs of smokers and non-smokers have been used in smoking campaigns quite successfully in the West.
In publicity films.
In publicity films.
But I'm talking about feature films.
Yeah, right. It is a popular myth, whether it be right or wrong, that most of the members of, well, most of the artistic group, whether they be painters, poets, writers, film stars, etc., are popularly regarded as drug users. To what extent is this myth correct?
I think to a certain extent there is some exaggeration. Some artists are addicts, but they are so few. And I have never seen a director who is addict, who's a drug user. All of them are normal.
Does this popular myth, although it is not quite accurate, have its followers amongst the youth who idealize the film stars or the film stars and therefore say, if he or she is a drug user, so will I be to be like him? Does this happen?
Of course, they imitate the stars, are idols, so the public can imitate them. So it is very dangerous to make films with, big sequences in almost all Arab films about drug using.
Well, then we've related to this question was the story that was released a few months ago about the confessions of Farouk al-Fishawi, a very popular big star who confessed that he was a heroin or cocaine user and he has cured himself. What effect does that have on youth particularly? It was a very courageous thing to do. And what has it got an effect?
To a certain extent it was a revolting story, and it has had a very good effect upon the youth, because they have seen one of their idols in such a bad condition, confessing that he was almost on the brink of losing his health and his stardom. So I think it was, to a certain extent, helpful.
As a film critic, what is a very general question before I go into specifics? What is your personal view on the state of the cinema today, which is so drug-oriented? Artistically, is this cinema, what we're seeing, is this cinema in the real sense of the word? What's happening today?
Most of the films about drug are of a very low standard, and most of the great Arab directors have never made a film about drugs or even a sequence in their films. So in my opinion, these films are a bad phenomena.
Bad phenomena artistically, as cinema, bad
yes.
As cinema.
And they are made almost by directors of a very low standard.
The commercially oriented.
Not only, because some great Arab directors make commercial films, but these films are not commercial, they are not well balanced.
Well, finally, as a concerned member of the Arab society, Mr. Dرويش, what would be your advice if you were in a position to guide the cinema industry vis-a-vis the drug problem that we're talking? Would you ban films on drugs altogether, or what would you do?
It's a very difficult question, because I'm against banning films, but with such a wave of drug films, one has to ban.
And on this note, we end today's discussion about the role of cinema and drugs. And my guest today was Mr. Mustapha Drouish, the well-known film and theater critic, and sometime director of the censorship in Egypt. Until next time, goodbye from me.